Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Rooney, published the Revelstoke Current, and welcome to In Conversation, our periodic discussion of things political. And this week I have with me Bill Green, who is the candidate for the Green Party Canada, and he'll be running in this October's federal election. Bill, welcome to Revelstoke and welcome to In Conversation.
Thank you, David, and nice to meet you, and looking forward to the conversation.
Very nice to meet you too. And you know, I know you ran in 2011, and you're going to be running again this year.
Correct. Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure that our viewers got a sense of who you are. Perhaps you could introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background. You've done a number of different things, and I think you've lived in different parts of the country as well. And you have a particular interest in the environment and a specific set of skills and knowledge that you bring to the table with that.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start close to the beginning.
Sure.
And I was not born but raised most of my young life in Hamilton, Ontario, southern Ontario. And I was brought up with a love of the outdoors, particularly by my mom, a love of water by my dad, and a love of thinking and analyzing really hard by my dad as well. And but I was pretty desperate to get out of Hamilton, the steel town. I spent a lot of time on Hamilton Harbour, and it was reasonably polluted even at that time.
Sure.
So right after high school, I headed north and worked in northern Manitoba, northern Saskatchewan, Northwest Territories, and then after I'd gone back to university, I worked in the high Arctic in my summer jobs. So what I brought away from that was absolutely convinced that I wanted to do some work that brought me outdoors. I just love being in the outdoors. That still remains a big passion for me. And but I also wanted to do, I had been doing mining exploration work, and I enjoyed that. And then I really wanted to shift gears. So I did undergrad studies in botany and geology at Carleton University. Met my wife in Ottawa, and right after graduating, both of us went off to Papua New Guinea together. Country just north of Australia, a large and incredibly diverse country, 700 different indigenous languages. We lived there for 4 years. 2 years we lived in tropical paradise, really, a place called Manus Island, a degree south of the equator. A very robust and healthy subsistence economy, and then we went to the capital city and worked for the federal government for a few years. A very different experience, but and I brought away from that a pretty profound respect for cultural diversity, and also realizing that we have to work hard to try to understand different cultures. We have to work very hard under that, but realizing that as hard as we work, their cultural differences are profound, and that we can never fully bridge that gap as much as we try. So part of the lesson for me was, do we stay in New Guinea? Possibly for the rest of our life. We'd fallen deeply in love with the country and with New Guineans. Or do we realize it's never going to be our country, and so we had better go home, and that was the choice we made. Came back to BC to do graduate studies at UBC, and after that then I ended up working on the west coast of Vancouver Island. For a while worked in a small consulting co-op on community economic development and community resource management, and then worked for 8 years for the Nitchalmouth Tribal Council, which is 14 First Nation communities on the west coast of Vancouver Island. That was a spectacular job, and I was running a fisheries program for the Nitchalmouth Tribal Council, and just loved to work on the ocean. I got to work in some pretty spectacular places like Clycourt Sound and Cayucot Sound. But then we were living on the east coast of Vancouver Island, and I was commuting to work in Port Alberni and working on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and both my kids were starting to grow very fond of skiing, cross-country skiing in particular, so we began to look for a place with a winter climate, and that brought us a little bit more than 20 years ago to a job in Cranbrook and living in Kimberley. So my job in Cranbrook for the last 20 years has been running an organization called the Canadian Columbia River Intertribal Fisheries Commission. That involves the Ktunaxa and Secwepemc communities and provides technical support and coordination to their efforts to protect aquatic ecosystems, to protect fish, to restore fish, and most significantly to restore salmon throughout their historic range in Canada. So that's an increasing part of my work and something that we're beginning to achieve some, at least on the political front and community support, we're starting to achieve some success. And I think we're on a path where we're going to have anadromous salmon back in the transboundary reach of the Columbia, I think within 5 years, and then into the Arrow Lakes, hopefully not too many years beyond that. So we've actually set a goal, which is anadromous salmon were lost from the Columbia, the upper part of the Columbia.
You better explain that term.
Anadromous salmon?
Yeah.
Okay, so salmon that spawn in fresh water, so think Chinook salmon, sockeye. No, so Chinook salmon and sockeye, principally in this area, but they spend their freshwater part of their life, they spawn, the eggs incubate in freshwater, and then they migrate out to the sea and do most of their growth in the sea. So the salmon that we see returning to the Fraser River. In any case, I think we're going to see Chinook and sockeye salmon back in the transboundary reach downstream of Castlegar within 5 years, and into the Arrow Lakes not too long beyond that. So we would see sockeye certainly, and I think Chinook as well, back here in the foreseeable future. And it's an incredibly gratifying thing to be working on, and also just the opportunity over the last 20 years to work with and to learn from First Nations. I keep surprising myself that I've been doing this for 20 years. You'd think I would have learned a lot, and I just keep learning more, particularly about the First Nations ways of looking at and being with the world are profoundly different than ours.
When was the last time that salmon actually migrated up the Columbia from the Pacific coast?
1940. So Grand Coulee Dam was built between the late 1930s and 1942, and so the last salmon were right around 1940, and the First Nations have actually set this goal of let's have salmon back to the very headwaters, which is Columbia Lake, so a long way upstream of here in Revelstoke, before 100 years is out, so before 2040. So that means making the steps beyond each dam one at a time. So in downstream of Ukini Side Dam and then into the Arrow Lakes is not a big step. The dam there is infinitely passable.
No, but some of the dams further downstream, that's going to be...
Yeah, so, but one of the encouraging things is that there are 9 passable dams on the main stem of the Columbia. So the sockeye and Chinook salmon that come back to the Okanagan River and all the way to the Soyuz and Skaha Lakes, they pass those 9 dams successfully. In the last few years we've had spectacular returns of those fish, showing that given a chance, given the right conditions, and given acceptable, small losses at the dams, that they can be very resilient populations. It's really exciting.
That would be hugely exciting. That'd be a tremendous change.
It'd be a tremendous change in ecosystems. I think it would be tremendous. So over the last few years, they've had up to 500,000 sockeye come back up the Okanagan River into a Soyuz Lake and further up into Vassal Lake and now into Skaha Lake. But at Brewster, Washington is right at where the Okanagan River flows into the Columbia. Mm-hmm. And that town has had an incredible rebirth as a result of the sport fishery for people going there to fish for sockeye. And so they've had new campgrounds, new retail stores. It just shows that, create the right ecological conditions and communities can benefit too.
Mm. I think that's tremendous in and of itself, and I think I'll make special note of that. We'll talk about this again.
Yeah.
For a print story, but I'm going to take it that this kind of experience and this kind of path that you followed through your life informs your decision to run for the Green Party of Canada. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, the things that have brought me to the Green Party, I would say number one has been the issue of restoring the functioning of our democratic institutions. And so the Green Party has long stood for moving from the first past the post system to proportional representation. And that's something that I passionately believe in, because, you know, striking for me the recent UK election, so seen as a resounding victory for the Conservative Party, and they got 36% of the popular vote. Then a resounding defeat for the for Labour, who got 30%. So that's six.
Liberal Democrats.
Liberal Democrats decimated. Yeah. But you know, so that's the first past the post system as well, where, you know, 6 percentage point can separate between having a huge majority and a crushing defeat.
Sure.
And we have the same situation in Canada, and we need to get past the point where, with, as in the last election, 38 or 39% of the electorate, you can form a majority government. And I think majority governments are great. Let's just make a system to make those robust, strong, and meaningful.
You know, I understand what you're talking about, and I understand the point. But, you know, I think most Canadians, you put it to them, if you can't explain it to them inside 30 seconds, their eyes glaze over and they just go, I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
And this is what happens. This is what happened the last time that it was raised provincially.
Yeah.
You know, people just glaze over and they don't want to know about it because they don't understand it. And unfortunately, that is what happens politically in a lot of politics. I don't know if you remember back in, well, I think it was 94 or 95 when there was the Charlottetown Accord, and the Reform Party basically killed it because they campaigned against it as Mulroney's deal, as they called him. Brian Mulroney was, despite being the most successful Conservative Prime Minister to that point, was very unpopular at that particular point in his career. And I can still hear Preston Manning's voice with that Mulroney's deal kind of drone, and you know, that resonated with a lot of people. They didn't understand the deal.
Yep.
And people in general, when they don't understand something, they say no.
Well, I completely agree that we've got to make it simple, and for one thing, you know, it's a fundamental principle in my thinking, which is keep it simple, stupid, because that's the way things work best. Not just because people can be convinced with simple, but because simple is straightforward, meaningful, and workable.
That's absolutely true. And you know, we have seen some changes politically. I think what happened in England is the results of that election were certainly unpredicted.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that thought it was going to go a different way, and the results in Alberta were much like that. But even more so, the victory, the overwhelming victory for the New Democrats was, I think, unprecedented. Albertans have a history, historically, of staging real revolutions politically. I mean, they did that in, I think, in 1910 or something. They did it again in 1930 when they brought Socrates to power, and then in
it was Socrates till 1970.
That's right, and then handed over to the PCs, and now they've done the PCs. So the Democrats have their shot at it. Whether they'll actually be able to hold it or not remains to be seen. But you know, that was, I think, inspiring for a lot of people. Certainly a lot of Democrats. And I asked you this, I think, too. You know, what kind of message was there for the Green Party in that? And what kind of, you know, perhaps you could explain to me or describe for our viewers what you thought when you watched that, the results of the Alberta election, and what kind of message was in that for you and other members of the Green Party in Canada?
I think there's some really powerful messages there. One is really a repeated message that we continue to hear every election, which is people do care a lot about their economy, about jobs, and about management of government finances. And I think this was the Alberta election results were people saying, wow. And I've heard this from people relaying street conversations in Alberta. Here we have all this oil wealth, and yet 6 months into an oil price collapse, and all of a sudden our government is essentially bankrupt, right? We have to make all these cuts. And contrasting the situation to Norway, where they made huge investments into a sovereign wealth fund, now totaling $1 trillion, and people are saying, why aren't we in that situation? So it tells us that people really want to, one of the most important things they want to see is effective management of the economy and of the government finances. And that's a hugely important message to Greens and every political party. And that's where the Conservatives in Alberta had dropped the ball.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one message I take away from it. Number two is that campaigns matter. And no, that's not a new lesson either, but it did show that a good campaign, a really good communicator, and can make a big difference. And so the lesson I take from that, and I've been planning to do this, which is campaign really hard, communicate with people, like talk directly with them, knock on as many doors as I possibly can, and that's how we maximize our opportunity of, or potential of winning the election, is through a strong campaign on the ground, door to door, meeting and talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
The third thing, it remains to be seen, I think, and I haven't seen the demographic breakdown of the Alberta election results. Certainly electoral participation, I think they got up to 59% voter participation, which doesn't look good, but by comparison to recent Alberta history, it's a real uptick. And so where's that coming from? You've got to think with all of the, or I'm tempted to think with all of the young NDP people voted in, that in part it's, finally we're beginning to see younger people mobilizing their voting and demographic power, which is there are now more millennials than there are boomers, and so they have some electoral power now, and I think they're starting collectively perhaps to realize that. So the lesson I take away from that is we have to try and achieve the same thing, though. The chance for the Greens, the value for the Greens, but also the value for our democracy is encouraging young people to think that their vote makes a difference and to vote.
Yeah.
I mean, fundamentally, if we're going to strengthen our democracy, that's the piece we got to do, right? Which is people got to think, my vote has value, I can make a difference. Mm-hmm. And so that's really one of the most important messages I want to get in the campaign. I'm not a millennial, I'm a boomer, and so I've got to figure out, work with young people to try and make that work.
Well, you and I are probably within a year or two of each other. I'm going to guess that like me, you were raised to believe that your vote mattered, that getting out there and exercising your franchise when you turned 18, that was a big deal. Being able to vote and going out there and doing it was a big deal. Mm-hmm. And you probably voted on a regular basis all of your life.
Every election, yeah.
And yet, I don't know what your kids do. I know my kids, I got a son who's in his 30s, and he's just starting to think along those lines. You know, I mean, throughout his teens and early 20s, he adopted a very cynical pose. And well, it never mattered. You know, nobody pays attention to what voters have to think. Well, I mean, well, if you don't go and vote, don't be surprised if nobody's going to listen to your opinion.
Yeah.
You know, but if you do vote, then yeah, they do pay attention because they want your vote.
Yeah.
You know, and so they're going to court you. And to a certain extent, political leaders will actually pay attention to what voters tell them. You know, through the polls or through dialogues with voters, whatever. You know, it's how do we reach these younger people now? I mean, you've probably given this some thought. I've given it a lot of thought over the years. I'm not sure I have answers, but I'd certainly like to know what you think. How do you plan on reaching out to younger voters as a Green Party candidate in this upcoming election, which is, I think, you know, I'm a conservative, and I think a lot of people in Revelstoke know that. But I think the election is important because we need to be able to have governments that have the confidence of the population, and that means that people have to be involved and they have to be engaged and they have to vote. if a large percentage of the population feels disengaged and disenfranchised and is cynical about their vote, how do we overcome that? What do you think about that?
Well, same as you, I've given a lot of thought. Don't think I have any great answers to the question, but what I have come to is that I think it's got to be, you encourage people to do something not by negativity and by slamming this and slamming that party, criticizing this. You encourage them with a positive vision. And I think that's particularly so with younger people, where I think they will respond to, here's the things that we want to improve and make better, and you know, we want to make the changes that will get us on the right track in terms of carbon emissions. We want to make the changes that will help us build an economy in this region in particular, but in many rural areas throughout Canada, help us build the economy so that young people can continue to live and thrive here. I think that's a big challenge here. I think Revelstoke's a fairly fortunate town in that regard, but there are other towns in the Kootenays, municipalities, where the opportunities for young people are not as robust as they are here, as I think they are here in Revelstoke. But so that the messaging the communications, what we're talking about has got to be positive and not saying, you know, some parties are launching on the, you know, anything but Harper campaign, which I don't think that's a mobilizing, motivating message. And so to me the fundamental is, you know, what are the positive things that we are part of our policies that we want to talk about. Secondly, we need to listen to younger people, and I need to spend a lot of time, so we've set up a small youth campaign team and we're growing that team. And I think fundamentally it's got to be younger people. You know, we have to build from that core of young people that are oriented towards the Green Party, that share some of those values, who want to go and talk to other young people about that. And I think the third thing is simply the demographic change. And I've referred to this already, that you know, for a long time I think younger people have despaired that, you know, our society has been so boomer generation oriented in policies, in the economy, and in so many ways, that they're kind of convinced, well, what can we do? You know, the boomers are controlling politics. And I think that's, we've now come to the point of that changing, where, and I think we see that part in Alberta, where, hey, there's more of you than there are of us now. You are our children's generation. There were a ton of boomers. We all had children. And so now there are a lot of young people that if they, and the big message to me is, please vote and make a difference in the democratic functioning of this country. I don't care so much about whether you vote Green or NDP or Conservative, whatever, but vote.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of selfless. You don't sound like a politician.
But I think it's the most important challenge. If we don't, you know, keep focusing on let's make our democracy work well, then we lose it all.
Mm-hmm. How far along are you in terms of putting together a platform? Maybe it functions a little differently in the Green Party than it does in, say, the Conservative or the Liberal parties, where the party policy, the party platform is put together on a more centralized basis, and you basically don't deviate much from that. Is that the way things work in the Green Party, or are you given a lot more latitude as a candidate here, in particularly in a rural area like Kootenay, Columbia, to put together policies or ideas and proposals that matter and work here that are specific to this riding?
Yeah, so I think you've hit on a really good point. There is a centralized approach to policy and platform development within the Green Party of Canada. 2 months ago, the new Vision Green 2015 came out. It's 120 pages long and goes through all aspects of Green Party policy and explains them in considerable detail. If people want to see that, I'm going to leave a copy here in the Revelstoke Library, but as well, it's available online, just greenparty.ca, and then click on Vision Green. So there is a centralized policy, but I think one of the fundamental differences between the Green Party and the others is when it comes to being in Parliament, can people express a different position? Can they vote a different position than the party line? And the Greens are very clear that votes are not going to be, quote, whipped, which means you have to vote the party line rather than your best attempt to understand and articulate the values of your constituents. And I think that's a really important distinction. And in fact, the incumbent has expressed the frustration, well, he can't represent his constituents in Ottawa, he represents his party to here. That's the way the Conservative Party is currently functioning. And so the ability to, and we've seen this in Parliament, Bruce Heyer, who's the second Green Party MP from Thunder Bay, used to be NDP, and he wasn't prepared to have his vote on gun control, long gun registry, to have that vote whipped and to vote the NDP party line. So he didn't vote that, he voted what he saw as the preponderant wish of his constituents, which is, no, we don't want the long gun registry. That's the way he voted out of the NDP, sat as an independent for a year or so, and then increasingly saw that his values aligned with those of the Green Party. But probably his value, well, I know that his perspective on gun control did not align with the Green Party as a whole. But despite that, he was able to, in good conscience, join the Green Party and continue to vote on bills in Parliament in accordance with his understanding of, combining his principles that he'd been elected on, presumably, and his understanding of the perspectives and values of his constituents.
Oh, good for him. More power to him in the coming election, too.
That'll be an interesting one to see in his writing.
Well, that's an intelligent approach to things. I mean, otherwise you lose candidates that might otherwise be able to win for you. People have to have some latitude. Not everybody's going to vote on be in lockstep, particularly on something like the long gun registry. I've always thought that the Liberal and NDP positions on that in particular were really urban.
Yeah, they were in an urban position. Yeah.
And that didn't work in doesn't work in places like here in Cooney, Columbia, or up north, or high Arctic on the Yukon, wherever.
First Nations communities across the Arctic.
Absolutely. Who would want to live out in the woods without a firearm? Of any kind. You just wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
It's a tool you need to have. That's all it is a tool. But that's interesting. Huh. How do you think you're going to do?
We're running to win, and so that means campaigning really hard. Our fundraising efforts are going. I'm happy with the progress we're making there. We're getting to our fundraising target of $50,000. Hopefully, we'll do better than that.
That's a hefty campaign for you guys.
Yeah, but I think we're going to make it there at least. We've got a strong campaign team. We're some really committed volunteers, campaign co-managers in Nelson, some really strong people on our communications team. So I'm really excited about our team. Been spending quite a bit of time in the new part of our riding, which is Caslow, Nelson, and Salmo, and that whole area down the Kootenay River to South Slocan. That in itself is encouraging because we have, in the last provincial election, Shane Dirks in that riding, running for the Greens, got 20% support there. So I think that shows that there's a lot of potential Green Party support in that part of the riding, and I think we can grow that.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think everybody sees that as a potential political gold mine. I know the David Wilkes, our MP, has been spending a lot of time down there, and I know that Wayne Stetsky, the NDP candidate, has been spending a lot of time down there, and both of them are salivating about the potential number of votes that they could garner down there. And that you see the potential is no surprise. How often have you been down there so far? And I'm going to presume we're going to see you down there for a substantial portion of the campaign.
Yeah, actually, I've been spending way more time in that area than I have been in the East Kootenay, which is closer to my home, and I got to actually put more effort into that part. But every other week or so, Sunday I was campaigning in Salmo, and a really encouraging reception there. It was annual Mother's Day plant sale. Met a lot of people there, then went door to door in Salmo on Sunday. This weekend it's Creston for Blossom Festival and Yakanuki Powwow on Saturday, and then on Monday in Caslow for May Days. So a lot of effort going into that area, and then I'm back to Crawford Bay in a couple of weeks. So a lot of time and attention going to that area. And as I said, I think I'm actually putting too much time and effort there because that's where a lot of the campaign team is located, and I need to build the campaign team in the East Kootenays, Golden, Revelstoke.
What are you doing here in What are you doing here in Revelstoke, and what can we expect to see from you in the next 5 to 6 months?
Okay, so I'm currently working full-time as well as campaigning, but I'm only doing that to mid-July, and I've got a leave of absence, so that's when full-time campaigning starts, mid-July, so I've got 3 months dedicated to that. I'm going to be traveling around, knocking on doors in every community. I have had a few meetings here to organize a campaign team and identified a couple of enthusiastic people here, so I'm very excited about that. We need to do more building. What you're likely to see over the next couple of months before middle of July is we want to do some kitchen table meetings where a Green Party supporter or interested Green Party person invites a bunch of friends over, we sit down at the kitchen table and talk to people about what they're passionate about, talk to them about the splitting the vote issue, which is much on people's minds. We'd like to have a wine and cheese fundraising event here, but then want to make it here for some key summertime events. Want to be here for a Saturday market or over a couple of times. So I think you have Wednesday evening markets as well?
No, that's only in the winter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and those are on Thursday afternoons.
Okay.
That's when we have the winter markets. But the Saturday market is 8 until 1, realistically 8 until 12:30.
Okay.
You know, every Saturday from now until almost, well, certainly till Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I've been to the markets before. I really enjoy them, and I think it's a good chance to meet people from Revelstoke, but also we're going to spend a lot of time here going door to door.
There are a lot of votes here.
Yeah.
You know, this is one of the stronger concentrations of votes.
One of the interesting things for me from the last election was that the place where I did, the communities where I did best were kind of the more outdoor recreation, perhaps ski town oriented communities. So I did best in Revelstoke, Kimberley, Golden, and Fernie.
Really?
And so I think that speaks to some of the appeal of the Green Party to the younger generation. I think it speaks to the younger demographics in those towns, and perhaps speaks to some different, somewhat different value sets, right? I mean, we talk about young people voting, but young people are as diverse or perhaps more diverse in their views than our generation, right? And so mobilizing that younger vote is really important, but it doesn't just translate into support for the Green Party or for the NDP or anything else. There's a diversity of views out there. A healthy, great, wonderful diversity of views.
Diversity is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Particularly in politics, I think we need it. What kind of use are you making of the internet and alternative ways of reaching out to people?
So we've got a reasonably active Facebook page for the campaign. Have our website almost up and running. Have a Twitter account, although I am not up to speed on Twitter yet, but I need to get there and have somebody managing that. So those are, going to be important parts of our campaign. I find the Facebook thing actually I quite enjoy posting articles that are of interest to me, as well as here's an upcoming event, and then seeing the response to that. I'm trying to remember one article I posted recently, which just generated a huge response in terms of bringing more people to the campaign Facebook page, and yeah, I completely slipped my mind what that was about.
Well, you're a boomer. You're like me. We're Okay, well, I'll make sure to get all of your social media information all included either in the video at the end and in any upcoming stories as well, so people will be able to get in touch with you that way.
Thanks.
That's good. Well, Bill, this has been very, very interesting. I've quite enjoyed our talk.
I've really enjoyed it.
Good,
yeah.
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed it too. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you. Oh, one last thing, I'd like to say thank you to the Revelstoke Museum and Archives, which permitted us to conduct this interview upstairs. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Peace, Kate. Thank you very much.
Great.